You put an ism at the end of something if it has an ideological component to it. Doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. It's just the aspect of that in this instance. This way, by referring to it as Hebrew Israelism, you're not granting anyone the claims of Hebrew Israelism. Because people say Hebrew Israelites, and that's fine, but are all the folks claiming to be Hebrew Israelites, are they? That's part of the discussion. So when I use Hebrew Israelites, I usually put it in quotation marks, which denotes a phrase of contention. But if you use Hebrew Israelism, you don't have to necessarily do that. Let's define it, though. A web of religious belief and practice based upon two central claims. Now, here's the thing. Lots of different types of groups. No, I can't explain all the groups to you today, but I will give you an introduction to them. But if you don't hold to some version of these two basic tenets, I don't see how you really would be a Hebrew Israelite in any manner of speaking. Firstly, descendants of enslaved persons thought to be of African descent are the true biblical Israelites. Every word in there matters. So enslaved persons primarily end up on the Western Hemisphere, but not only. For example, some enslaved persons left, got freed, went back to Sierra Leone, Freetown, for example, Liberia. Some Hebrew Israelites will count those folks. See what I'm saying? Because they fulfilled some of the conditions, even though they ended up back in Freetown or Liberia. Thought to be of African descent, meaning they are not of African descent. They are not, as traditionally understood, Hamitic. They are actually Semitic. Of the true biblical Israelites, true implies one is false. So the Ashkenazis, the Sephardic, Yemeni, Iraqi Jews, all those are religious and ethnic imposters upon Hebrew Israelism's understanding. It's not just, hey, us, it's hey, us, not those guys, right? Secondly, lineage, who you're descended from, has some kind of salvific implication. Salvific means relating to soteriology. Soteriology is the theology of salvation. So even though they have different understandings a lot of times of what salvation even really means, in some way, who your father was determines your standing before God. Whether you could even be a candidate for salvation, or if you can, do you end up as a second-class citizen? Those types of things. Any questions on that slide right there? I'm pretty relaxed and flexible. I go fast, but we're going to have fun in here, and I bet you some of those other classes are boring. So any questions based upon just those right there? Yes, sir, in the back.
Can you we just came in when you were going over the descendants of the slave. Can you get that one time?
I'll put it the short way, which is going to be crass. One time I saw a meme. It was by a Hebrew Israelite and said, if your butt came over here on a ship, you're an Israelite. That's the short version. Except the meme used other words. Yeah.
Now I understand those two central beliefs, but is that any Edomite or Moabite person there cannot be saved? Is that a central thought?
Some versions of Hebrew Israelism, other versions, they can be second-class citizens. So Edomites and Moabites, essentially as a distinct ethnic group of people, they were in the Transjordan area, which is basically the modern-day country of Jordan. Essentially as a distinct group of people are done away with, as far as distinct. Now, obviously, their genes are in the human gene pool. But as far as saying, look at that Edomite, look at that Moabite, they're gone. One West Hebrew Israelites, who we're going to talk about here in a second, they believe Moabites are the Chinese and Edomites are white folks. Not all Hebrew Israelites go with those breakdowns. But we'll discuss that. Now I'm going to define Hebrew Israelites. They are adherents of Hebrew Israelism who claim and profess a Hebrew or Israelite identity. And if a person is in some way a Hebrew Israelite, it usually involves some form of religious practice and liturgy. Now they say this isn't a religion, this is our culture. Right? But you open up with certain phrases in the beginning of your teachings. You observe in some way the feasts and the fast of the Old Testament, you say. You say you observe Sabbath day rest, etc., etc., etc. They'll say that's just part of the culture, right? But it's clearly religious, right? A lot of folks do this, like the 5 percenters, the Nation of Islam. They don't like being called a religion. It's just a culture. It's a way of life, right? Because they feel like it's defining them. But look, walks like a duck, talks like a duck, all that stuff. You know, it's a duck. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but it certainly is a religion. That's why people leave Christianity and adhere to Hebrew Israelism. See what I'm saying? Let's talk about varieties of Hebrew Israelism. There's the rabbinic Tanakh only. That basically means they're non-messianic. They don't like that term. They view it as a pejorative. But sometimes this can basically look like black or brown Judaism, basically. For example, Kapper's Funyeh, who is Michelle Obama's cousin, is an example of that. There's other groups out there that are like that. There's a guy named the Mighty Mighty Hebrew who's online. He would be Tanakh only, so no New Testament. And a lot of the anti-New Testament arguments actually look like what you might hear from the Kemetz, if you know who they are, the Egyptologist guys, or sometimes even atheists. They'll borrow some of their attacks to levy against the New Testament a lot of times. And they'll just be like, hey, this is still our culture. We're Hebrew Israelites, but we don't accept this New Testament Gentile edition, right? Then there's the One West or One Westers. In response to your question, I mentioned the idea of One West. What happens is sometimes when a religious group gets attached to a certain geographical location, sometimes you use that as an appellate to describe that understanding within the larger framework of the religion. What I mean is, during the 60s, there was a place called One West 125th Street in Harlem. I've been there, and now it's a Shake Shack and a lawyer's office, right? At that location, though, is where they grew and a lot of their ideas were formed. Ironically, there was a school called the Commandment Keepers, all right, in Harlem. Came about in 1919. Some guys left that and began something called the Israelite School of Torah or Tanakh. That school grew into the One West 125th Street location, all right? And so they came out of this, but what happens is they ended up accepting the New Testament and Jesus as Messiah in some way. So there's overlap between these groups because a lot of these groups then will do this. Well, we accept the New Testament, but you got to understand, I'm a Jew, and so Paul was only written to Gentiles, and so it doesn't apply to me. Or they might say, well, Paul, for example, was a rabbi giving rabbinical opinion or ruling or laws, but that's not for me. Or Paul had errors, and we cast out Paul. So they'll do different things with the New Testament. Some will say they accept all the New Testament, but then when you start talking about the virgin birth, which they don't believe in, they'll say, oh, that's a textual addition and stuff like that, even though there's no evidence that it's a textual addition. That kind of stuff. So it's a game that's played. Then there's the so-called moderates. So if there's any moderates watching this class, they'll be like, Vocab's always painting us with a broad brush, but he doesn't look at the righteous Hebrews. We don't get down with all that hate. A lot of times the so-called moderates, the reason I call them so-called is because once you start interacting with them, they start sounding real nasty like some of the One Westers. And even if you go to their normal service, Israel of God, who are nice guys, I went to one of their services, and the whole time they could not stop bashing those Sunday Christians and their ignorant practices. Pig-eating Sunday Christians. Israel of God is one of the nice guys, right, who has a 6,000-seat member church in Riverdale, Illinois. So this is not small potatoes, right? I've been there as well. They were very friendly to me, but they still like to bash those Sunday Christians, right? The moderates sometimes aren't as moderate as they appear, give off, and all you got to do is prod and poke a little bit. Sometimes there's legitimate moderates, but now this is the broad category. I know there's not really a name for them because there'll be like some random guy over here on the internet, something over here, you know what I mean? Sometimes the moderates get associated with something we jokingly call the Hebrew individualites, meaning they're on the internet all day, but they don't really fellowship with nobody. Those are the Hebrew individualites. But you could really be of any ideological persuasion and still be a Hebrew individualite. Then we got the syncretists. Anybody know what syncretism is?
It's where a person takes a lot of beliefs and they mix it all together.
Yeah, take some Catholicism, Hebrew Israelism, Islam, Moorish, Temple Science, form up like Voltron, got a new religion, voila, right? Well, they do this, and I've met Moorish, Temple Science guys who are Hebrew Israelite. I got a friend who knows some Roman Catholic-styled Hebrew Israelites. Now, granted, these are minority positions, but a lot of this religion is tailor-made. You can make it as idiosyncratic as you want, because as long as you hold to those first two tenets, you're in the club. That's why if somebody leaves Hebrew Israelism and they start doing an interview with, say, like me, and say, I don't get down with all that anymore, what's the first thing their former religious co-religionists say is they say, but do you still recognize we're the people of the book? That's the concern. Hold on to that, and other stuff we could talk about usually. Then there's Christian Hebrew Israelites. Obviously, that's sort of a form of syncretism, because there's all kinds of syncretism. You got Pan-African Hebrew Israelites. You got ones who are trying to blend Yoruba stuff from West Africa. All kinds of syncretic movements going on. This is where you see, for example, churches embracing Hebrew Israelism in their doctrine, but they maybe keep some stuff. Best example of that is a guy named Omar Thabue in Louisiana. And they're the only group I know that holds to the Trinity, salvation by grace through faith. The only Hebrew Israelite group I've ever seen say they hold to that. The rest deny all that, right? But he starts talking about the 400-year prophecy of 1619 is the beginning of slavery. So 2019, something big's going to happen because that's 400 years of our people's slavery. So he still gets off into the woods somewhere, right? So there's guys like that. That it's like, what? And some of them are even willing to be called Christian, because a lot of Hebrew Israelites they don't want to be called Christian. Well, it only appears 3 or 4 times in the book, first of all, and they have that kind of thing. They want to be disassociated from it, because they view it essentially, the term Christianity as basically saying worship white Jesus, right? And so they don't like that. But some will say, yeah, we're the real Christians. We're the original Christians. It just depends.